So, good evening, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. Today is the fifth session of online diplomacy course, and we will be discussing about dollar diplomacy. We have our speaker, the Ambassador of Cuba to Pakistan, His Excellency, Honorable Zener Caro. So, first, I would like to introduce Mr. Ambassador, and then we will move forward. His Excellency Zener Caro was born in Havana, Cuba on 25th of July, 1976, and he is graduate of sociology from University of Havana, Cuba in 1999. Moreover, he speaks Spanish, English, and Chinese language. Other than that, from 2001 to 2003, he studied Chinese language at postgraduate the Foreign Affairs College and Peking University in 2003 to 2005, master's degree in international foreign policy, Garcia Higher Institute of Foreign Relations, Havana. Then professional experience in Cuba and abroad. From 1999 to 2001, he was diplomatic attaché to Asia and Oceania Division in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cuba. From 2001 to 2003, diplomatic attaché at Embassy of Cuba in People's Republic of China. From 2003 to 5, he was third secretary, Asia and Oceania Division at Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cuba. And from 2005 to 6, he served as official mission, Henry Reeve International Contingent of Doctors, specialized in disaster and situations and serious epidemics, Pakistan. And in 2006 to 9, he served as the second secretary at Embassy of Cuba in People's Republic of China. And then moving forward in 2012 to 2015, he was first secretary at Embassy of Cuba in People's Republic of China and special envoy of the Cuban government to Nepal, coordinator of the Henry Reeve International Contingent of Doctors. Then in November 14, 2020, he was appointed as the Ambassador of Cuba to Pakistan. He has also participated in Cuban official delegations during visits to China, Malaysia, Vietnam, Laos, Dominican Republic, and other countries as well, and other organizations. So that's it from my side. Now the floor is yours, His Excellency Ambassador Zener Caro.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Today we will go through some history of international relations. So we will go back to more than 100 years ago to discover the origin of a concept that's dollar diplomacy that is being widely used right now, but it has an origin in 1909. So I will share with you a presentation. I will make some comments to the images that you're going to see, and at the end I will be open to answer any kind of questions that you can have. I will share my this one.
Yes, Excellency. We can see the screen.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's make a little history because dollar diplomacy it's a foreign policy of the U.S. from 1909. It's a policy for President Taft, but its origins are back to 1824, and it's back to probably to the very first moment of the after the American independence, when the government of the new America realized that they have a huge potential in their south frontiers in the Latin American countries. A lot of countries, 34 Latin American countries with a lot of natural resources. And at that time, very weak countries, most of them with less than 50 years of independence, and some of them, like Cuba, that were still in hands of Spain as a colony. So from the very beginning, from 1776, from the independence of the colonies, of the American colonies, they realized that they have the potential to go to Latin America to obtain the resources they need for their development. And the first doctrine that the American governments produced was the Monroe Doctrine. That is still, they are still using that doctrine in their policy towards Latin America. And you can summarize it in 4 words. They said America, and when they say America, they said the whole continent, not only USA, is for the Americans, but not for Latin Americans, but for the US. So from the very beginning, they just saw Latin America and the Caribbean as their backyard. Then in 1902, the president Teddy Roosevelt, the first Roosevelt, this is not the second one, Roosevelt, this is the first one. He just invented the theory of the big state. And the theory of the big state, in words of Teddy Roosevelt, that is the guy that you are seeing here in the cartoon, he said, whenever you go, you need to speak softly and you need to carry a big stick, and then you will go far. So you can use the diplomacy language, but you need the big stick, and the big stick was the US Navy, that even at that time was the most powerful Navy in the world. Then in 1904, 2 years later, the same Teddy Roosevelt wrote the infamous Roosevelt Corollary. It's an amendment to one law of the United States, saying that the US can intervene in any nation in the Western Hemisphere anytime they want to fulfill their obligations, international obligations. So from that time, 1904, the US and the US governments believe that they have the right to intervene in every country of the Western Hemisphere, but basically in Latin America and the Caribbean. And from that time, 1904 was the probably like 10 to 15 years when America intervened in more than 20 Latin American countries, including Cuba 2 times, but also Haiti, Nicaragua, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, even Argentina. And anytime that you see an American intervention in Latin America, that's the origin, this Roosevelt Corollary. But then in 1909, William Taft defeated Teddy Roosevelt in the elections, and he decided with his state secretary, they decided that they need to change a little bit the foreign policy of the US, and they decided that the idea was to send not soldiers to Latin American countries, but money. Because this president, William Taft, he strongly believed that the Latin American countries, that they were so poor and they were so weak, they need investments of foreign capital. And what he thought was, if we just keep sending troops, if we just keep sending soldiers, we are not going to gain the support of the Latin American countries, and the Europeans will come to Latin America and they will invest their money in Latin America, and we will lose our backyard. So the idea of William Taft during those 4 years of his presidency was to shift the capacity of the states of the US to influence world affairs, not from military action, but from the power of the US dollar, that even at that time was the strongest currency in the world. So using this policy, you can see the map that is on the right side, this one that is here. They began to invest a lot of money in most of Latin American countries. They invest a lot of money in Cuba during the Taft presidency. They spend a lot of money in Mexico, Chile, in Brazil, and Bolivia. And they began what we call in Latin America the history of unequal trade, because they were investing money in our countries, but what they do is that they export, the US exports its finished products like cards or whatsoever, but what they bought in Latin American countries were only raw materials. So what happened with the pass of the year, that there was a huge commercial deficit between Latin American countries and the US. So in the case of Cuba, that is my country, they only were interested in buy Cuban sugar. At that time was the most famous sugar in the world. They never want products that we did with sugar. They just want the raw sugar. So they took the sugar to the States, They made sweets, they made candies, and they sold sweets and candy to Cuba. And as you know, a candy is way too much expensive than raw sugar. So with the pass of the year, we have a huge commercial deficit with the US. Where were the goals, the objective of the dollar diplomacy at that time? Mostly there were three objectives. The first was to strengthen the US interest abroad by encouraging the investment of the US capital in foreign nations, mainly Latin America. But there is something that is probably not very well known, that the dollar diplomacy was also used on China. At the beginning of the 20th century, when China was opening their seaports to foreign powers, and after all the aggressions of the foreign powers against China, US also tried to use the dollar diplomacy on China. But as the Germans, the Britons, the French, they arrived first to China, they imposed their conditions to China, mainly the Britons, and also the Japanese. The US has not the power to invest a lot of money in China at that time. But even from the beginning of the 20th century, they were also thinking on China. So when you see this goal 100 years later, you can say that this goal was fulfilled. So the US really achieved the goal of strength their interest in Latin America, and especially their investments and their economical interest in Latin America. During those years and during the first half of the 20th century, the US controlled most of the Latin American natural resources: oil, all the agricultural products, iron, copper, in every single country of Latin America. And that was because of the combination of this dollar diplomacy with the big stick policy, with some of the policies of the rest of the presidents, US presidents. The third one, I'm going to skip the second one. The third one was to block the European influence in the Western hemisphere. It was achieved because the US consolidated itself as the most important foreign power, foreign influence in Latin America. So they just displaced France, Italy, Germany, Britain, from almost all the Western Hemisphere, for almost all Latin American and Caribbean countries. So at the end of the first half of the 20th century, US was the first commercial and trade partner of all Latin American countries, and by a big difference. For instance, Cuba in 1950, the US had 72% of the Cuban trade. The rest, 28%, was with Canada and European countries, and it was the same for all Latin America. So this goal was achieved. And the second one that is here, that is stabilize foreign nations economically and politically, specifically Latin America and South America, that was not achieved. Cuba is one of the results of the non-achievement of this goal. But during the first half of the 20th century, you have not any kind of stability, of political stability in any single country of Latin America. So this is the era from 1920 to 1960, 1970 is the era of the military dictatorships in Latin America. Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Mexico sometimes, Chile. The worst was the Chilean dictatorship. Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba. So they were countries that were never stabilized by the US investments. So most of historians and most of the experts on international relations used to say that the dollar diplomacy was a failure because of this, because it didn't bring any stability to the countries where the US were investing. But this is not only from the Latin American countries. So U.S. investments has bring stability only to Europe and to Japan with the Marshall Plan. It was the only example in the history of international relations where a massive flux of U.S. investments has bring political and economical stability to a nation. But it's Europe and it's Japan, the first world. Any other place in the world where the U.S. has invested a lot of money and sent a lot of economic interest, first they have did it with soldiers. So the dollar diplomacy and the big stick here, and what they call later the big carrot. I show you the carrot, and when you just smell the carrot, they just give you with a stick, and that's the foreign policy of the U.S. So globally, if you only focus on the second one, you can say that the dollar diplomacy was a failure, but it's not like that. The reality is that the dollar diplomacy itself, only as a foreign policy strategy, was not very successful. But when the U.S. combined dollar diplomacy with we call it in Cuba cannon diplomacy, air carrier diplomacy, when they mix it, they achieved their goals in most of the regions of the world. So this is the dollar diplomacy is one of the bases of the current U.S. foreign policy, and it has not been abandoned for any American president. Trump, that he was an isolation president, he used the dollar diplomacy. Biden is using the dollar diplomacy. Obama, Kennedy, the Bush. So this is one of the core components of the American foreign policy. So the legacy of the dollar diplomacy is very significant. It's very, very significant. I was talking about the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is the most complete example of the dollar diplomacy. After the World War II, the U.S. government, Roosevelt, realized, the second Roosevelt, not the first one, realized that they need to stabilize Europe, because otherwise the Soviet Union and the new socialist and communist countries will probably expand their influence through the Western Europe. So what was the way to stop the Soviet soldiers and the new communist countries? First, soldiers in Germany. Second, to put a lot of money in Europe to stabilize Europe countries and to assure the permanent subordination of the European countries and the European foreign policy to the US. And it was the same in Japan, but in Japan it has a difference. They just threw 2 nuclear devices in Japan. So they have like a debt, a moral debt with Japan, but it was the same. You need Japan because you need to counter, you need to fight against the influence of Russia, communist Russia, and then communist China. So they pour money in 2 places with the same goal. And as I was telling previously, the dollar diplomacy is one of the components, of the main components of the U.S. foreign policy, even now, when they are facing the challenge of the Chinese economy, and even before, when they face the challenge of Japanese economy, of the European economy. So now, when you read, especially in the newspaper, not in the international relation specialists and books or whatsoever, but mainly in the media, when you read the concept or the idea of a dollar diplomacy, mostly they're talking about sometimes of currency words, but mostly of the use that most of the big powers gave to their economic power to achieve their goals. I just used some images on the presentation. The first one, this one that is here on the left, is one of the biggest examples during the last, I don't know, probably 50 years. This is the Chinese against the Taiwan. So Taiwan and China has been fighting for more than 50 years for the diplomatic recognition of the countries of the world. And how is the fighting? With soldiers? No, with money. So for instance, Taiwan went to an African country and put a lot of money and they buy politicians, and they just build hospitals or roads or whatsoever, just to achieve their diplomatic recognition. Till 2000, 2005, Taiwanese were winning this war in a lot of countries, more than 30 countries. But then after China became the second economic power in the world, things has changed. And I don't know, I'm going to talk about, for instance, Panama. There is a Latin American country. They had relations with Taiwan for a long time, but then the Chinese investment became bigger than the Taiwanese investment, and they switched. Now they have relations with China. So now Taiwan has only relations with, I don't know, 13, 14 countries in the world. But it's because China is fighting and is winning this dollar diplomacy match between them. The second one is the one that everybody knows. It's the Chinese economy against the US economy. The Chinese with this Belt and Road Initiative, that which here in Pakistan you have CPEC, and the Americans tried to boycott the CPEC and all the Belt and Road Initiative with policies like the one that they are having in Afghanistan, for instance. And the last one is the constant match, the constant fighting between different currencies in the world. The Europeans trying to get the euro as a very strong currency in order to get some advantage in trade. The same from the Britons with the pound and everything. I think that so far that's the presentation. So far, those are the main ideas that I would like to share with you. As I told you, it's history. It's mainly history of international relations, and it helped to understand the basis of the current US policy, and it helped to understand the use of dollar diplomacy right now in the media and in some books of specialists of international relations. So I'm open to any kind of questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your fruitful presentation and discussion. It was a very informative discussion. So thank you very much for your presentation. Now, Ms. Leah Komba would like to ask a question. Yes, Ms. Leah, you can ask.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Komba from Angola. I don't know if you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear. Yes, we can hear.
It's okay.
Okay. I have 3 questions, and I don't know if I will be able to ask all the 3 questions, but let's go to the first one. The first question is, if he helped the dollar becoming the coin of the world. We know that the United States is the biggest economy in the world right now, and I want to know how dollar helped the dollar becoming the coin of the world, or if the dollar diplomacy has some relationship with this happening.
You can just ask all the questions at the same time, and I will answer at the end of all of the questions. It's okay. Not one by one, but
okay.
all together.
Okay. Yeah, let's go for the next one. The next question is how the goal of dollar diplomacy has changed during the years. You said that in the beginning, in the 20th century, dollar diplomacy had one goal, and I want to know if this goal has changed over. The third question is, can I go to the next one?
Yeah. Please.
So you talk a lot about how dollar diplomacy was centralized in Latin America, and I want to know why they didn't invest dollar diplomacy in Europe or Asia. Why not in these continents?
Okay.
Yeah, this is the last one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Obrigado.
Excellency, Mr. Osvaldo would like to ask a question as well. He raised his hand.
Yeah, just get all the questions, and I will answer in just one. It's better for the time.
Yes, okay.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Here is afternoon. I don't know what time might be there. Well, I will just be very quick. I have a question for Miss Ambassador right there. I'd like to know, as we know, some currencies depreciate against others, and we have main currencies like pound, like dollar, who still remain strong as years goes. Like as part of the work I do, because I start finances, governance, and politics as well. I would like to know what the United States has been doing all over these years in order to maintain the United States dollars as the main currency. I mean, not the main one, but in the top five currencies in the world, because sometimes it can depreciate against others, and still they have another way around to put it at the back as this as their position was. Like, what exactly is behind, this kind of measurement in order for the government of the United States to maintain U.S. dollars strong against other currencies?
Thank you, obrigado. Another one?
Excellency, we have another question in the chat box, and it's like current status of freedom in Cuba today, and how does US trade affect Cuba? From,
Yeah, I got it.
so, Excellency,
And-
Miss Yusra Naeem would like to ask a question as well. Miss Yusra
Okay.
Naeem.
Username, okay.
Hello. Hello. Thank you so much for such an informative and a very detailed study on dollar diplomacy. Sir, my question is that if we look at the definition of dollar diplomacy, or if we just look at the view of dollar diplomacy of Teddy Roosevelt, you mentioned the big stick. And we have been seeing this happening so much in history until present, like till Afghanistan and other happenings, that US has constantly been presenting the big stick along with the idea of investment, as has been explained very thoroughly by John Perkins in his book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. But on the other hand, if we look at China or Korea or Japan, we do not see any idea of big stick in their diplomacy, international relations and diplomacy. What do you think about it? I would like to know your opinion considering these two comparisons. And if we look at their success, like of China, we can see the Belt and Road Initiative, we can see the CPEC, and now they're thinking of extending CPEC to Afghanistan as well. So we see that the countries are very friendly towards China, but still we find a very reluctant kind of image when US presents their idea of investment through dollar diplomacy. As you mentioned that Trump has been doing it, Biden is doing it, other presidents as well. So I would like to know your opinion. Thank you.
Okay. Any other one? Okay, if it's not any other question, I will go through this. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 questions. So I will try to answer
Yes,
the
Excellency.
questions.
I think you can answer because we do not have further questions, so you can answer.
Okay. Okay. First, well, I would like to send a special greeting to our friends from Angola. It's a country that is very, very close to Cuba. Why the dollar diplomacy at the beginning was only focused in Latin America? Because at the beginning of the 20th century, the US has not the power that has right now to go to any other places. They tried on China, but they have not the economic power that they have right now to go everywhere. So that was the reason that was mainly focused on Latin America. The idea of the US dollar as the main foreign currency in the world is coming from the Bretton Woods agreements in 1972. So at that time, and if you are students of international relations, I would advise you to look through information about Bretton Woods agreement, because all the international financial structure, all the international financial architecture was made in 1972 during the negotiations of the Bretton Woods Agreement. What are the mechanisms that the US are using since that time to assure that the US dollar could be the main foreign currency in the world? World Bank and International Monetary Fund. If you look at the quotes that the US has, so in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, when you have to vote for any kind of issue, the votes are not nominal. It's not one country, one vote. No. The countries has what they call quotes. That is according to your power, to your economic power, you have 30% of the votes or 27% of the votes or 15% of the votes. The US has kept more than 30%, right now it's 27, 28% of the quotes, both in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So any kind of idea, any kind of transformation that the other countries, including European countries, has proposed to change the international financial architecture has been, in fact, vetoed by the US because they have the biggest quote over there. It's so funny that right now in the International Monetary Fund, US has 20% more or less, and China, that is the second one, biggest economy in the world, should have around 4% of the votes. So when the US get Canada, Japan, South Korea, and their allies in Europe, they have more than 50, 60% of the quotes of the voting in the International Monetary Fund and in the World Bank. So there is no way that you can change that international architecture. That's one mechanism. And the other mechanism is the reserve that they have on gold. The biggest gold reserve on the world are now around China, but the biggest one during, I don't know, more than 100 years were in the US. And which is the biggest support to a currency? Gold reserves. If you have gold reserve in your central bank, your currency can be strong. Your currency has support. And the US has kept huge amounts of gold reserves in the central bank. Those are two mechanisms. Now, with all the globalization process and all the interconnection of the world economies, they have had some challenge, for instance, from the euro or from the Chinese yuan, or at some point from the Japanese yen. And when you go to a bank, you see that the strongest currency in terms of changing is not the US dollar. It's probably the British pound, or it's probably, I don't know, the Switzerland money. But when you go to the trade, when you analyze the flux of the international trade, probably more than 60% of the international trade is made in US dollars. What is China trying to do? China is proposing to the nations that are trading with China to use their own currencies. For instance, with Russia. So they pay the trade in Chinese yuan, Chinese renminbi, or in Russian rubles. They try to avoid the use of US dollars, but till this moment, the impact of this kind of agreements of swap, of the currency swap, has been little in the international trade structure of the world. Probably in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, we're going to see a change in the power parity of US dollars and other currencies in the world. But unfortunately, even if China overcome US as the main economic power of the world, we're going to see the hegemony of US dollar for a long time. Our guest was remembering me by chat that Pakistan is having the same kind of agreement with China, using the Chinese yuan to avoid the US dollars in the trade. But we still are far away from seeing the fall of the US dollar as the main currency in the world. What are the changes of the dollar diplomacy through the years? US went from big stick to only the use of power with Teddy Roosevelt. to dollar diplomacy. We're going to use our economy. We're going to use money and not soldiers. To another change with the other Roosevelt, that we're going to use power and money at the same time. I think that there is a conference about the carrot diplomacy or something like that. I'm not sure, but it's the idea of the carrot diplomacy. I show you the carrot. I show you the benefits of trade with me, but at the same time, I have my soldiers ready to change, to overcome your regime, to throw an invasion or whatever in your country, if you are not even satisfied only with the trade with me, or if you not accept my conditions for trade. That's what they have done basically in Latin America. Panama, for instance, is a big example of that. But that's also what they have done in some other places in the world, even in Africa. Because the overthrow of some African governments, I don't know, Patricio Lumumba, at the end, it was not just political, it was also economical. And it was the same that they tried to do in Angola, when they tried to overthrow Agostinho Neto's first government. So what they want a democracy, or they want their money spent in the right way in Angola? No, they want the oil from Cabinda, and they want the resources from Angola. That's the idea. That's the same idea in every, and the goals are the same. So to strengthen U.S. influence in the world, to try to stabilize governments, but not any kind of government, the government that agree with the U.S. policies. So let me go through another one. I just explained what's the difference with China. For the person who was asking, Yusra Naim, I think that was the person that was asking for China, Korea. I would like European Union or European countries. My friends, almost every country in the world use the dollar diplomacy, but now we call it the economic diplomacy. Here in Pakistan, for instance, Prime Minister Imran Khan has changed the focus of the foreign policy, and now they are talking about economic diplomacy. Most of the countries of the world are talking about economic diplomacies, the ways that you use your economy strength to achieve your goals abroad. What's the difference? China, even when China has a big army right now to send to any place, they're not doing it, because the main focus on China is invest for money and try to gain, and that's the big difference. The US has never been interested in gain the heart and the mind of the people, only the resources of the country. So we have spent, I don't know, probably more than 60, 70 years without seeing the use of soft power in the US policy. Now they're using a lot of soft power tools in their policy. So they are combining economy, military power, and soft policy. So that's a big difference right now. China is in another channel. China is using mainly economic power and also soft power. Every single country, when you have a big presence of China, when you have a lot of investment on China, what kind of institution can you find? Confucius Institute, teaching Chinese schools, or like here in Pakistan, a huge China-Pak Cultural Exchange Center. And it's the same in a lot of African countries. It's the same in some Central Asian countries, because what China is trying to do right now is the culture. What I'm trying to do is the soft power tools. I don't know what's going to happen in 50 years when China has the military power to do to go in a different way. But when you go through China history, and China is my specialty in this career, China has never in 5,000 years of history has used a massive use of their army power to go through other places. They have annexed some places inside China, but when you're trying to think what are the biggest invasions of Chinese army to other countries, is Vietnam, that was like 1 year of a small war. I don't know, maybe you can help me to find another examples, but when you look through the history of the US, military invasions, my goodness, you need not one conference, you need 6 months of daily conference to speak about every single American invasion to a foreign country. And Afghanistan is the last and the saddest example. And the question that what is the current status of freedom in Cuba today? I don't know what you are meaning for freedom, because freedom is a huge concept. So we can be discussing for, I don't know, 3 hours about what is freedom. But if you are asking me what is the current status of Cuba, I would like to tell you, as I did in the last conference that we had with our friends from the Youth Diplomacy Forum, that we are a socialist country trying, and this is the most important, not the gap, not the tab of if we are socialist or communist or whatsoever. We are a country, a small and poor country, trying to get their own road to development at only 90 miles of the US, with an independent foreign policy, with an independent economical policy, and in a small country that is trying to help to any other country in the world. And Angola here is one of the best examples of the help that we are giving to the third world countries, also Pakistan. And the US, about US trade with Cuba, I'm going to resume in 2 sentences. One, we have a lot of problems to trade with the US because of the US embargo against Cuba. And the US embargo against Cuba means mainly that the US government are trying to impose sanctions and obstacles to the trade of Cuba with any country in the world. So we can trade with all countries but US, but with a lot of obstacles and overcoming a lot of sanctions. Cuba is the only country that has been subject, the only country in the world that has been subject to more than 250 sanctions in the last year, only in the last year from the US. So I guess that I got all the questions, but you can ask any other questions if you want. I've been trying to be brief on my answers. I don't know if there's any other question or.
I think, Excellency, we do not have any other question. Everything is clear to all the participants. So we end up our session here today. So thank you very much, Ambassador Zener Caro, for joining us and giving your fruitful presentation and whole detailed historical background of dollar diplomacy. And what you said, this is totally right. And we have seen this, the behavior of United States in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in, with the Latin American countries. So this is the case with other, underdeveloped countries also. So US deals all those countries in the same way, not, other European countries. So this is, I mean, what we can say. But so thank you very much to all the participants for joining us today. And we will see you in our upcoming sessions. Thanks again to Excellency Zener Caro and other participants. So we are ending up our session here today. Good luck and see you soon.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for your patience.